would win in a fight? The entire studio animation system or one glitchy boy? I'm Henry Galley.
And I'm Gus Zagarella, and we are not alive, and we are also here to talk about Glitch Productions and how the show Murder Drones fundamentally changed the course of indie animation here on YouTube.
Yeah, baby, yeah. Oh, this is going to be a fun chat. We are wired, we are buzzed, we are other robot-related words. We both respectively watched a combined 6 hours of Murder Drones yesterday. These characters are zipping around in our brains, and we're ready to talk about how they were the beginning of the new indie animation renaissance we're in the middle of right now, thanks to Glitch and all of the wonderful creators they work with.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'm a little jelly because you've got Glitch basically in your backyard since you're an Aussie citizen now.
No, it's true. I think there are a lot of reasons people are probably feeling jealous of Australia right now. We just had a really nice election, which is rare.
Whew! Woo! You don't say! You don't say! Gestures widely at America.
Which, weirdly, we will be getting into a little bit later as it relates to certain things regarding the funding of creative work. Stay tuned for that. But most of all, we want to talk about how Murder Drones, while it's often forgotten in discussions about some of Glitch's big shows like The Amazing Digital Circus, the brand new The Gaslight District, the incredibly exciting upcoming 2D debut of the channel with Dana the Owl House Terrace's Knights of Guinevere, which looks awesome.
Yes!
But you can't tell this story without thinking about Murder Drones, because Murder Drones permanently, you might say, reprogram the identity of Glitch, once known as Glitchy Boy, from a glorified meme channel to an indie animation powerhouse. And Gus has done some amazing background research on this, which we're going to get through, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how the actual storytelling and the structure and the characters and overall creative direction of Murder Drones informs Glitch's house style and has an impact and connections to every single show that has come out and been even more successful since. But before we get into that, Gus, if people wanted less of this more kind of hoity-toity intellectual analysis and just wanted to hear us scream about the different weird little robots we love from the show, how would people do that?
You can hear us talk way more about Murder Drones on our Patreon. We're still going to be talking about the show and what we love here, but our raw, uncut thoughts are up there on the same day that this video comes out. So if you got $1 a month to spare, definitely sign up. It's just that one tier, and you get access to our crazy, insane backlog full of hilarious movie reviews.
About 70 hours of content. It's nuts.
Oh my god, yeah, at least, man.
I'd buy that for $1.
Exactly. So if you want more Murder Drones, go there. Speaking of funding, let's talk about the fact that Glitch went from initially just doing their parodies of video games to getting a show, Meta Runner, funded by Screen Australia, a really cool government program that a lot of countries out there, I think New Zealand has an equivalent of it. There are a lot of countries that fund their own arts because, man, it is just so good when the people in charge of a nation recognize arts and culture as a major component of why it doesn't suck to be there.
Screen Australia, as you were sort of telling me a little bit off mic, Gus, was one of the first steps that let Glitch up their production from more than just sort of a mere YouTube channel to a genuine, bona fide indie production studio, right?
Absolutely. And so Screen Australia was part of the funding for Meta Runner, and it spread out its funding through a lot of different projects as it usually does. But what made Meta Runner special is that it was the top investment of Screen Australia, at least at the time. I don't know if anything has surpassed it since, but other sponsors got in, Crunchyroll got involved, Fortnite's own Epic Games got involved, and Meta Runner secured a lot of production values as a result. Through this same sort of confluence of funding, they were also allowed to spin off the Super Mario Glitchy series into a show called Sunset Paradise, which is about one of their OCs, but very much retains that Nintendo-esque charm, cute, cuddly sort of vibe to it. And as somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool Nintendo fan, it's definitely on my list to check out at some point.
I guess if you were to map this on to other projects or like other sort of historic animation studios, the kind of Super Mario Sunset Paradise Meta Runner era is we're looking at the kind of Steamboat Willie of this, you know, or the sort of early DreamWorks 2D before they really found themselves with like Shrek. I would imagine that given obviously producing any show is so many more decisions and experiences than just the creative decisions. You know, it's management, it's production, it's paying people. You would have no idea how much personnel would go into making just one episode of one of these shows. And given that they've had this longevity, I can't speak to like how it is to work for Glitch or like what the corporate culture is, but undeniably based on the results, they figured out how to get these shows in on time, under budget, and make them profitable in a way that allows them to keep proliferating. And this is a notoriously competitive industry to get your stuff out there in.
Well, that's the thing, Henry. They were able to secure funding in regards to Meta Runner and Sunset Paradise and their early stuff, but essentially because this funding was coming from like outside, from grants, from sponsorships, that sort of thing, and because production, like you said, so many personnel are involved, resources are expended, so much money is spent, essentially every single Glitch project up to a point was operating at a loss on loans. And then there was Murder Drones, which came along and vastly outperformed anything the studio would have ever expected would have been possible right after these other projects. And you can see the proof in the pudding when you look at the first episode of Murder Drones and every episode of Murder Drones, and you compare it to Meta Runner Season 1's views. Now, we're going to give Meta Runner a try at some point, and I'm sure it's a great show, and I'm sure it built the foundation for a lot of what they were doing.
And please let us know in the comments if you'd like to see us discuss it.
Yeah, if you're a big fan of Meta Runner, sound off. However, it is undeniable that Season 1 of Meta Runner, to date, that entire season's views could be added up, and every single episode of Murder Drones has at least 3 times that amount of views.
Hot damn!
Yeah, so Murder Drones was the beginning of profitable Glitch. The merch sales were already there somewhat from this earlier stuff, but merch integration and brand recognition began to really skyrocket, and because Murder Drones was the thing to do it, it became a trendsetter for a house style that has served these other shows exceptionally well, and I think we're going to be talking about that for just about the rest of this video.
That's the sort of businessy side out of the way. If you're not like us and are just like dweebs for the production of this kind of thing, don't worry, that's over. We're going to get more into character and storytelling, what makes Murder Drones work and why so many elements of it has been carried forward. But I guess to cap off that first part, it is undeniable that Glitch has found such a winning formula when it comes to calculating the cost of these shows, and then through a model that I assume is a mix of grants to take some of the pain out of the initial funding of the projects, and then making up profits on a mix of YouTube ad revenue, because crucially, there is nothing in any of these shows that is kind of properly ad unfriendly. I think the Gaslight District is maybe the most risque in terms of its content and its material, but like in Murder Drones, there's never really swearing worse than like crap and frick, and in The Amazing Digital Circus, there's obviously the hilarious self-censorship.
The filter, yeah. The bonk, bonk, yeah.
Which I think is great, honestly, because as much as, you know, I'm English and I live in Australia, those are two of the most sweary countries in the world, so I can appreciate a good bit of colourful language as much as the next guy, but I think there's no denying that those sort of limitations they place on themselves forces them to be a little bit more creative with their dialogue and where the jokes come from. But ultimately, it has that sort of double-edged sword of making the shows very marketable, and I don't mean that as a dirty word, because at the end of the day, we live in the real world. These shows have got to make money to keep being made.
Absolutely, and the thing is, because Murder Drones did so well within the, like, framework framework and limitations of being a YouTube exclusive series and sustain those views for into the beginning of the Amazing Digital Circus, you saw this like rise in prioritizing creator focused stuff. And I think it's like, Liam Vickers got in touch with Kevin and Luke, the Lord Witchigal brothers who founded Glitch, and when they came together and they formed this first show, I'm sure they didn't know that it was going to be so successful. But because it was creative freedom and a focus on like, take it as far as your ambitions will take it, tell the story you want to tell in a way that almost no Hollywood productions could ever do outside of, stuff like A24, which is a studio that offers a lot of creative freedom to the people under its umbrella. You get a like ethos that underpins exactly what makes a Glitch show.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, dude, A24 is a perfect comparison because it is a production company that keeps its stuff relatively cheap compared to a lot, which, by the way, is I also think the fact that it makes so much sense that the Knights of Guinevere is going to be several shows in, because I think the fact that Glitch went all in on 3D as a way to both stylize their work, but also to cut costs and production time compared to 2D, which obviously goes without saying, 2D is a beautiful art form that we love and respect. My fiance, friend of the channel and frequent contributor, Meg Chutin, is a 2D animator, so obviously we're always gunning for 2D. Seeing Looney Tunes The Day the Earth Blew Up in cinemas has been the highlight of my sort of movie year so far. But using 3D in this case has let them sort of rout the competition in the same way that using 3D did for DreamWorks, and their attitude to creative freedom, much like A24, has allowed them to court these creators that already have an independent audience. Like, obviously, Gooseworks was already a beloved creator, both from her music that she'd created for different things, and from great, like, little, like, weird projects like Thalassin.
And Little Runmo! My beloved Little Runmo!
A little Runmo representation. But that's the thing, you can really see how that inspires the offbeat comedic sensibility and aesthetics that you'd later see in The Amazing Digital Circus. Glitch's biggest selling point is it's the company that the big popular indie creators want to go work for. Every time one of them go do it, they bring their audience with them, who then fuses with the Glitch audience to go on to the next show. And man, I know you're going to feel me on this, but I feel like I have to explain this to the audience. I cannot stress enough what an incredible achievement it is to make one thing, finish making that one thing, make a different thing, and have a lot of the first thing's audience go and check it out. Because sometimes getting people to check out new stuff, even when they are already your fans, said with love to the one subscribers, it can be like pulling teeth sometimes. Because, and I know this from my own experience, it can be really taxing to try something new when there's already so much out there that you know you like already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one of the things aesthetically that has helped bind these shows together is that they all feel a little bit like PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games. And I say this as someone who like grew up with a lot of those games, and like it's an evolution of the kind of 3D character models and slightly darker settings compared to, let's say the Nintendo brand. So it's almost like Glitch has gone from like embracing the original aesthetic of some of the games they were parodying back in their old days and tapped into that like appeal of less known side of people's childhood, like the medievals and the pandemoniums and like all the weird ones that really deserve to be not just remembered but reimagined in the same way that like a lot of these more beloved, like, colorful child-friendly IPs have just kind of been picked up and proliferated.
We were discussing this a little bit on our Murder Drones Patreon we were talking about earlier, how we're seeing a uniquely very late 90s, like turn of the millennium millennium through to 2007 influence creeping in on all of these shows. Like we were saying, we've got this kind of Qubits meets like Code Lyoko type thing going on in Murder Drones. The Amazing Digital Circus is like equal parts Bingo the Clowno, if you know, you know, with the sort of like Poppy the Performer and like almost a little bit of Alice in Wonderland to it. And then with the Gaslight District, we're seeing this mix of your sort of Maxwell Atoms, Grim and Evil, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, with that sort of Henry Selick, Tim Burton, Nightmare Before Christmas, Court Bride, Riz. And I think it's wonderful because in the previous iteration, or like generation, maybe you'd say, of indie online projects, you were seeing things that were throwing back to a lot of the like earlier 90s stuff. You know, your sort of like golden age of the cartoons on like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and stuff like that. But it's nice to see that with each generation, we see the nostalgia cycle move forwards and influence new aesthetics. Because, and this is something that Murder Drones is in many ways about and engages with in a really wonderful way, but I think it is so easy to feel like the stuff in your own recent childhood is cringier than older people's nostalgia, which somehow feels more pure and beautiful for you never having experienced it except through them. But I think as we in this generation start to sort of become dinosaurs, I imagine that a lot of the things that are being like referenced and homaged and alluded to in Murder Drones is stuff that would have been completely alien to its prime demographic now. And I don't know, I think rather than seeing that as existentially terrifying, I see it as kind of beautiful, because I think it's nice to see creators not romanticizing, but redeeming their like misspent youths, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like, you know, once you're properly out of your youth and you're less afraid of misspending it, like, that's just the way that life works. You start to
Mm-hmm.
appreciate the, like, oh, it's time to, you know, reconfigure some of these memories and make something positive now that, like, I'm not scared of losing them. I know that they're a part of me. Where this ties in specifically to Murder Drones is that I feel like its approach to futuristic tech and sort of sleek drone designs, it reminds me a lot of how people in like the 1950s, like, you know, they imagined like laminated furniture and like you spray it with a hose and it like cleans itself off, and like TV screens the size of walls. And we look at that now and we're like, this is so different from like our present day, but it's kind of charming in that it presents a future that will always be novel and weird. And in the era right now of like generative AI and like NFTs and crypto and
Actual
like
evil
technology getting,
robots.
technology getting like really like fucked up and like against us and like antisocial and anti-humanity, even though like the world of Murder Drones still presents like cosmic horror elements through robots, it's frankly a cooler way to imagine what they're capable of, to imagine what artificial intelligence could be as almost something that has a humanity unto itself, and even in the absence of humans, is living lives that they're trying to find meaning in and trying to find connection with each other in a way that reminds us all of what it was like to be an angry, misunderstood teenager.
Yeah, well, we made these comparisons in our last video, but it's definitely carrying forward the fire of projects like Wally and Nine, and using these metaphors in, I think, a really poignant and entertaining way. And I think connecting to all this, and I guess where we can truly begin our discussion of how Murder Drones has influenced everything that comes after it in the glitch sphere, let's start with Uzi, the protagonist, because I think Uzi establishes the archetype. The kind of strange thing we've seen, and it's weirdly specific, is the kind of main characters of glitch shows from Murder Drones onwards, that they're almost always young women, not always teenagers. I think Pomni's like 25. They're always outsiders in the system, whether it's Uzi having her kind of strange, mysterious backstory and her alternative tastes, Pomni being the newest member of the circus, or Mel being like the only secret human in the world of undead in the Gaslight District. They always see the world a little bit differently. There is almost always a kind of male authority figure that is somewhere on the scale of like benign to sort of sinister and evil. We've got Uzi's dad, Khan Dorman, who doesn't quite believe in her. We've got Kane, the ringmaster in Amazing Digital Circus.
Ken the Butcher.
Yes, Ken the Butcher.
Wait a second.
In Gaslight
Wait
District.
a second. I'm just realizing now, and I'm kind of losing my mind, that we got Khan, Kane, and Ken. What's going on over here, there, guys? We realized that in real time. We're not doing a bit.
Gotta say, I'm glad they spelled Kane with a C, or this could have been really awkward.
Whew. You! I tug my collar.
I support this aloof crew. But no, that's the thing. I think it is really interesting that there are all of these big similarities. And it's not to say that they're derivative. I think that Uzi, Pomni, and Mel feel like very different and unique characters. But clearly it's a big element of the house style since Murder Drones that this would be the kind of lens that we see the worlds through. And I think it's clearly something that connects with their audience.
Yeah, and if I may, put on my media analysis hat, for once in my life. I will say that it's very appropriate that Murder Drones opens with a meta reference to the hero's journey, because I think in a way this dynamic that we've just described is crafting a new sort of iteration of a monomyth, of a recurring story, and it is one in which a well-meaning but ultimately misguided patriarchal figure has to accept that a young, non-masculine force needs to present herself to the world and to change it for the better, and change herself and accept herself in the process.
I think you're completely right, and it's really going to be so fascinating to see if, when the Knights of Guinevere comes out, which I am so excited for, it looks awesome, to see whether this plays into the same pattern. So cool! It does look so fucking cool. But yeah, it's something that is really interesting, that we are seeing these running elements, because you could say we've got our kind of younger, unproven outsider protagonist, we've got our sort of paternal figure, and there's always as well this element of the frightening and the unknown in all of them. It's the murder drones or disassembly drones themselves, and to a greater extent Absolute Solver and Sin in Murder Drones, and we see it again in, I think, the abstractions in the Amazing Digital Circus, and we see it in the virtues in the Gaslight District, and the angels as well. These things that are sort of frightening and beyond our understanding, and it's kind of strange that even though the Amazing Digital Circus kind of seems like an outlier here, unless you look at these symbols a bit deeper, really hoping I don't sound like the skin theory guy right now. You can tell me in the comments if I do. My deepest apologies. But in a way, I think all of these stories are coming-of-age stories, spiritually.
Well, not only that, they, I think, are all stories of a world that is already over but needs to be redeemed. Because, Murder Drones takes place in a world where there are no apparent humans at the beginning and carries that theme throughout its entire story. We never see the real world in the Amazing Digital Circus thus far, but if we're going by I have no mouth and I must scream, it's kind of source material and inspiration, you do get the sense that maybe there is no world out there, and maybe this is all there is. And that's certainly how it feels for these characters. Meanwhile, the Gaslight District blatantly opens up on things will never be the same again. Humanity is all but dead, and the angels and virtues are basically almost like the rotting carcasses of former divine authorities in this world. And I think that's really fascinating, because so much mainstream work and so much work up until now has been about averting the apocalypse, denying the apocalypse, or accepting the apocalypse, or dealing with a very specific kind of post-apocalyptic action-packed mold. Whereas with the glitch shows, we are seeing okay, well, what if the world is fundamentally fundamentally gone, fundamentally ended already, that does not prevent us from rebuilding it or from making the most of what we have in a fundamentally doomed state. It's bleak and it's like kind of existentially terrifying, but it's not cynical. It's the opposite of that.
Yeah, I think it plays into a lot of like absurdist ideas, absurdist in the sort of Camus sense of the world of how do we
Yeah.
cope with a sort of like meaningless existence. And I think in a lot of ways, it makes sense that this stuff is getting popular now because I think it's speaking to a lot of anxieties that obviously everyone is feeling, but I think is most keenly felt by the sort of like Gen Z and Gen Alpha people who, for lack of a more elegant way of putting it, have never known a sort of pre 9/11 world. Everything's always been kind of weird since they were in
Yeah.
here, but you still got to get on with it. You know, it's a generation of people who had to do their like high school finals social distance because of COVID. That's gonna make you want this sort of weird pseudo-apocalyptic art to make you feel really seen.
Absolutely. And isn't it curious that when creators get ultimate creative control, a lot of the things they talk about in their work reflect the real anxieties and the honest emotions and feelings that most of us, and especially like, the up and coming, like still needing to prove themselves generation have, are expressed through that. I just find it fascinating that maybe this is something that mainstream studios fear and don't want people to think about, and would much rather have like, what if IPB met IPC?
What if Batman met Mario?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny because, like, as we mentioned, Glitch started off with a lot of these video game parodies, but the fact that they went from that to, like, let's trust Liam Vickers, that went well, so let's trust Gooseworks, that went well, to let's trust Part-Time Seagull, that's gonna go well, and it's going well.
And you can definitely trust Dana Terrace.
And Dana Terrace for the Knights of Guinevere. Like, again, it's one of those things where, like, the kind of stories that should be told, because frankly, they're the kind of stories that are screaming out in the hearts of everybody who is taking this world as it is and wanting to do something about it and wanting to indulge in some kind of expression or rebellion or sense of community enduring through all of this. Those are the kind of stories that Glitch is telling.
Yes, and I think they're so wonderful at it. It is telling a story structure that is as old as time, that we've all grown up with in, like, all of those plot elements that I discussed earlier. You could find those exact same things in a lot of the sort of late 90s or like sort of 80s to late 90s Disney films, from The Little Mermaid to Mulan. That same kind of, there's always the sort of young woman who sees the world differently, the dad who means well but doesn't understand that the world could be changed. And I think that the way the Glitch and its various creators underneath its umbrella, the kind of secret formula, the formula that we're referring to in the title of this video, I would say is these classic coming-of-age narratives that are infinitely relatable to anyone who has ever been young, which, unless you're Benjamin Button, is basically all of us. The elements of, like, sci-fi, like, fantasy genre, technology playing a particular element in basically all of them, but the third little, like, magic little cherry on top that completes the sundae is the inclusion of horror theme.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, we also wanted to talk about the fact that we have so much invested in indie art and indie expression here on the internet because we too have thrown our hats into the ring over here at We Are Not Alive. We've got a couple of shows that we want to promote, from the Kingmaker Histories, which has just wrapped up its third season and is a steampunk alternative history about interdimensional beings, and the One Very Special Stone that is lodged in the head of one Colette Geiss, and her two companions are trying to help protect her as they travel across fantasy Europe.
Yeah, it is a wild time. You will have a wonderful time with the Kingmaker Histories. It's an audio drama podcast, like our other projects, because we fill the niche of, we know that you like crazy stories out here. We know that you like fun characters, but we also know everyone's so damn busy these days. There's not always time to be able to just sit down and enjoy a show on your TV or laptop. So we give you these so that when you're on the go, you can stick your headphones in or your AirPods if you're a richer man than me,
Yeah.
and listen to them no matter what you're doing or where you are.
We are there for you in your car. We are there for you when you're doing laundry. We're there for you when you're washing dishes. We're there for you when you're, hiding a body and you want to take your mind off of it. We've got
We're
you
in your
covered.
walls right now. So yeah, that's the Kingmaker Histories, which I think, if in particular you're a fan of the Gaslight District and all of its weird gooiness, a lot of people explode.
Oh, and it's
and
crimes.
Get decapitated, and it's crimes. Oh, lots of crimes. If you want to see people doing crimes in a vehicle, definitely check out the Kingmaker Histories right here on YouTube or wherever you check your podcasts. And if you are a huge fan of murder drones, much like us, and you've heard us geek about it, and you think, wow, these guys, I think they know a thing or two about this kind of stuff. I'd love to see them write something similar. Then you should check out Killjam XXX. That is Killjam XXX. It is a deranged cyberpunk death game audio drama created by myself and Addison, produced by Meg. Gus is executive producer, wears many hats in the
Heyo.
show. It is similarly about a young woman trying to find her way in the world. Faustina Fetamine, a adorable cinnamon roll with over 500 confirmed kills with her big machete that is also her best friend called Gutter, and also the kind of sleazy cyborg transmask conman manager Bellamy Pink, played by friend of the show Zooey LeFou, who is just absolutely wonderful. If you love ultra-violence, if you love ridiculous dark comedy, future world building, robots, blood and guts, crazy intrigue-filled plots, and larger-than-life characters, then you're really going to enjoy Killjam XXX, and I really recommend you go check it out, tell us what you think of it, and yeah, whether you like them, whether you don't like them, we always appreciate you taking our recommendations on this and seeing what we got, because as we have discussed at length in videos like this and others, it ain't easy to make stuff, no matter what stage you're making it at, so we will always have the utmost respect for fellow creators, regardless of if the medium or scale differs. That's the Kingmaker Histories and Killjam XXX. Thank you for hearing our little shameless self-promotions.
And if you've made it this far into the video and you want to support the idea that indie artists should be free of all other limitations, say that I am free in the comments, much like Uzi and Murder Drones, because we want to know that you made it this far.
Absolutely.
So, Henry, why don't you talk a little bit about horror as the resident horror evangelist? You converted me. You've done a lot of work in the genre, and I think that it now is the time to sort of talk about how it intertwines not just with Glitch Productions, but the indie spirit in general. It has kind of an undercurrent of horror to it.
Yes, I couldn't agree more on that. So, for context, anyone who is a long-running fan of this channel will know that indie horror is my life. That was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 reference. That's how deep cut I go on this stuff. But it is a genre that has given me my livelihood, the first money off of writing I've ever made, and that got me all the jobs I've had today were writing and selling short horror stories to places like the No Sleep podcast and the Hidden Frequencies, and all places like that. And no matter what other genres I delve into, whether it's creating or consuming, horror is always going to be the closest to my heart. And it's always going to be something that I think is a kind of safe space for people who feel like outcasts and weirdos. If ever you've been to a horror convention, myself and Meg have been lucky enough to go to a few of them now, they are some of the most delightful places on Earth full of the nicest people dressed in the scariest costumes. And Gus, I mean, you, me, and Meg earlier this year, because Meg has a Lizzie Borden Award nominated screenplay, The Open Secret of East Hall. We all got to go to Marietta, Georgia as official guests of the Renegade Film Fest, where we met some absolutely
Oh,
awesome folks. You're probably seeing B-roll of that right now.
yeah, what an experience that was. Again, like great filmmakers, so many talented, wonderful people, but also such a nice venue, such like a historic experience. We ran into a Wana fan there as well, which was really cool.
Shout out to
Shout out
Tom!
to Tom. It was so amazing. And also I think we all felt like we were in the right place and amongst the right people who want to put their mark on the world and want to make art that really lives up to that old adage of disturbing the comfortable and comforting the disturbed.
Yes, which brings us back to these glitch shows. I don't think it takes sort of a genre expert to see the heavy influence, of the kind of what I might call the horror overtures of each of these shows. Obviously, Murder Drone started the trend. As we discussed a little bit in our first video when we'd only watched the half of the series that was out at the time, the show takes heavy inspiration from vampire fiction, with the disassembly drones following so many of the tropes. They need to drink the oil, aka blood, of the worker drones to survive. They can't be exposed to extreme heat, and there's this sort of tension in them between their desire for a sort of human emotional connection with these other beings that they are hardwired to also think of as prey, which is one of the very compelling things about vampire fiction. What makes that so juicy, whether you're looking at True Blood, Interview with a Vampire, or bloody Twilight. And also, on top of that, there is this wonderful undercurrent of sort of cosmic horror and eldritch fiction that we're seeing through the sort of nightmarish lens of absolute solver and sin. And it manages to take these two, which are basically some of the oldest examples of the horror genre out there, but make them feel very fresh by fusing them and giving that robot coat of paint that, even if the tropes feel kind of subconsciously comforting and familiar, they never feel played out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like this is a like a way that and I think horror does this more than any genre, is that the homage is done with both respect but a desire to surprise and unnerve. In a lot of other genres, like I think fantasy and science fantasy are the biggest sort of offenders in this. There is this desire to replicate and imitate.
Like, it's one of those things where it's fair to say that, in a slightly less informed way of putting it, the glitch shows will take these classic formulas, but they won't just play them out, they'll put a little stank on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a fire that is
I think
carried forward in the Amazing Digital Circus, because, let's be real, if Gooseworks just made that a show about a bleak post-apocalyptic world with a cast of characters being tormented by a, like, overtly evil AI, it's like, oh, this is just I have no mouth and I must scream again, which you could maybe finally get away with now that Harlan Ellison is dead. He was a highly litigious fellow when he was alive, so I don't think you'd be able to get away with then. But when your X meets Y is that meets Poppy the Performer slash a, like, educational CD-ROM you vaguely remembered getting free with a foul-tasting clown-themed cereal when you were 5 years old, you get something that is completely bizarre and novel.
yeah, like these things are in conversation with the old works, but sometimes the addition to the conversation is a jump scare and then a pat on the head and a wink.
They do really good things with, I think, horror comedy as well in all of these shows, because none of these shows, I would say, take themselves 100% seriously, because I think a key element of the sort of coming of age credentials is recognizing the sort of inherent dark comedy of existing in the world and growing up. Like, it's something that I think if you took it 100% seriously, it would fall into like melodrama rather than drama.
Yeah, well, it's self consciousness and self awareness are these things that so often are like, oh, you need to possess these to be a not cringe being. But the truth about them is that the moment you unlock both of those things, you're more susceptible to seeing all of like the stuff that's like, that you think is wrong with you, that you think is wrong with the world. But that's a necessary, very necessary part of living, and it doesn't like it's not an on switch, it's the on ramp to a whole life worth of very contradictory, as you were saying earlier, absurd in the Camus sense experiences. And all of the Glitch shows have that in common and capture that, like the marriage of the world is terrifying but also the world is fun and it's full of people you care about.
So, of course, with the Gaslight District, obviously, the horror influences are a little bit harder to spot. They're more subtle in
Yeah, I mean, zombies in horror very like seldom interact. And also, what's so scary about vultures?
You need to be an intellect on the caliber of Chuck Wendig to manage
Yeah,
that.
I just don't think there's anything scary about like sunken cities and like, the end of times and the fact that humanity might be abandoned. Like I watched that film Mad God, and that was basically like, very touchy-feely, like heartwarming romantic comedy to me because I'm the Joker.
Because I'm the Joker, Mad God is just normal God to me.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, seriously, like the Gaslight District again, it just like it is clear that it's about family and it's about crimes and it's got this heist caper type stuff. Henry, I know you weren't going to, but I know I'm offloading this onto you. Don't make a Vin Diesel reference because I know the commenters will, especially now that I've egged them on. But it's about family, and it takes this like idea of a broken world and the people trying to make their way in it, and it takes it to the absolute extreme of, okay, what if the world was so broken it can never be fixed, and what if like the one last bit of humanity really does bite it? Where do we go from there? It's a really interesting, promising like beginning to the show, and like the ones that came before it, I'm very curious to see where it goes. And I think there's always this thing about like, mafia and like crime stories too, where like it's the person who gets in too deep and fundamentally changes and has to compromise their morals, and they kind of lose their humanity sometimes in the process. And it's funny that that is like the very real stakes for Mel, and it's also what Ken is kind of like, kind of pushing back on, where it's like, don't become one of us. You got to stay safe. You got to like, be my little girl and be like out of, all this danger. And it's really refreshing to have this kind of timeless dynamic reframed in such a horror forward kind of way. Innocence and a lack of getting your hands dirty in this world really does just mean bleeding differently and not being able to be seen bleeding, or everything will change.
And you can draw a direct line back from that to the conversations had between Uzi and Khan in the very first episode of Murder Drones. And to paraphrase the Big Lebowski, and so the whole darn human comedy continues to perpetuate itself.
Exactly. And I think we've made a pretty good case that Murder Drones not only made Glitch what it was in terms of forming its house style, it is also all just a shining example of what happens when the arts have proper funding.
Abso-fucking-lutely, and it's why I'm so glad that we've got that we've got Glitch. By the way, quick little sidebar that feels extremely relevant to this. Screen Australia obviously has fingers in a lot of pies. Meg, either last year or the year before, God, time is crazy, was even involved in making a pilot for another Screen Australia funded show, Starship Q-Star, which was part of the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Fresh Blood Initiative. And not only that, but Screen Australia is behind so many great movies. Something that is an eerily similar case to the Glitch story. The Philippou brothers, better known as Raka Raka, comedy sketch YouTubers, refined their stuff, and then with the help of Screen Australia, made Talk to Me, one of the most successful and scary possession movies of the last several years.
Australia might be leading the way in making sure that artists are able to further their vision. And it's sad to see, like, the way my country is going, the way America's going. But the truth of the
It's the
matter
reason why
is,
there's corruption
I'm
in the
just
world.
the corruption in the world. But yeah, like I'm just like legitimately so happy that something like Glitch Production exists, and just what it represents and its journey is so emblematic of what could be done everywhere to make art not just more profitable, but better.
Yeah.
Better for the creators, better for the audiences, better for everyone involved. And it could still succeed, wildly so. So, really, what are we waiting for?
Absolutely. Like, we're now going to toss that ball to you, audience. What do you think of the things we've said today? Which glitch show is your favorite, and what sort of stuff do you hope they'll do in the future? Continue the conversation down in the comments. We read and reply to a lot of them because we love hearing what you guys have to say, and we appreciate what a
Yeah.
kind of intelligent and eloquent audience we've got. If you check out the Patreon, we hope you enjoy the stuff there. And last little note before we finish up that I think I need to just say as a bit of an arse covering thing. I didn't mention earlier, I know that some of Glitch's fans skew younger. You probably shouldn't check out Killjam Triple X unless you're over 18 or have parental permission, because it is really violent and there's a lot of swearing and sex. It can be admittedly a little bit more intense than Murder Drones, even though it's kind of crazy and fun in the same way. So just, yeah, exercise caution.
We'll be seeing you in the near future.